I had been working in my parents' Chinese restaurant for as long as I could remember being alive. Everyone in the family did everything that they could to help out. I recall doing my homework at a table in the back of the dining room after school, while also doing things to help out in the restaurant. I never had a problem doing it, and I actually enjoyed it. It was nice to take breaks from schoolwork to do things to help customers. I began doing some delivery work when I was old enough to ride a moped too. We were in the city, so it was easy enough to get around that way. It was easy to make quick deliveries to a pretty wide area of customers. As I got older, the slow times were my favorite times to be at work, as I had much more homework that I had to get done. My family lived in an apartment that was right above the restaurant, so in slow times, it varied how many people were down in the restaurant working. If we were really slow, I sometimes had the dining room to myself, and it was nice and quiet enough for me to get some work done. You might think that we got a lot of delivery business on snowy days, but we really didn't if it was a Friday. Saturday was our big delivery night, and one Friday, when I was 14, when I arrived at the restaurant, it began snowing. We had a television on, and it looked like we were getting a pretty bad snow coming. The upcoming storm, of course, completely killed our dining room and our delivery business for the night. But we had been expecting that. I let my family know that I would keep an eye on the store as they came and went from the store to the apartment. The further and further that the snow piled up, though, the less likely it seemed that we were going to get any sort of customers. It was the middle of winter, so it had gotten dark quickly, and just seemed darker and darker with the snow falling so heavily outside. I began to really get lost in my work and became somewhat oblivious as to what was going on around me. I was a bit shocked then, when I suddenly heard someone enter the restaurant. I looked up and saw a single guy come into the dining room. He looked to be like he was in his mid-20s, perhaps. I was about to get up and walk over to the host station to get him a menu and offer him a table. But he walked past the host station. I paused, thinking at first that maybe he just wanted to come to the back counter and then order some takeout. But there was something about his demeanor that made me nervous, and I really couldn't bring myself to stand up right away. Perhaps it was the size of the guy or the look of the guy or a combination of the two, but something about the guy just kept me from getting up out of my seat and saying anything. The guy stopped not too far from my table and simply looked at me for a moment. He had a weird little smile on his face, and that just served to make my uneasiness grow even further. This was years and years ago, and I still remember myself gulping as I sat there, wondering when the guy was finally going to say something. When he finally did say something, I rather wish that he hadn't. I don't want to really tell you everything that the guy said, but none of it was pleasant. He began making some very nasty comments about Asian people using some very derogatory terms that I absolutely won't repeat. But even though, or maybe even because this was a pretty high population of Asians neighborhood, he was making negative comments about us being there. He had some nasty things to say about my family running the restaurant there too. Worried enough for my safety to finally do something, I moved to get up from my chair. There was a staircase on the other side of the dining room that led up to the second story of the building. My plan was to run up there and to get the attention of my father and my older brother. They would both hopefully be able to handle this guy. Before I could get up, however, the man quickly reached into his coat and he pulled out a knife. I immediately froze in mid-stand-up and then slowly sank back into my chair. I had never had anyone pull any sort of weapon on me before, and I didn't know what to do. I wanted to call out, hoping that my family upstairs would hear me, but I found that I couldn't do that either. I feared that this man was either going to attack me or kill me, but found that I could neither do anything nor get up the nerve to run away from him. The man continued to mock me, but not just because of my heritage this time. Now, he had noticed my fear and made sure that he was mocking me for that too. I couldn't understand why I was in this position. what I did to deserve it, you know. But I really thought it was possible I was going to be maimed or killed in the next few moments. That is when something happened that quite literally saved my life. The restaurant phone began ringing. I had told my family that I would stay down there and watch the phone and the door, and we always tried to answer the phone within the first 2 rings. I wasn't going to get up to answer it, and I figured the guy wouldn't let me anyway. But whoever was calling kept letting it ring, and that got the attention of my family upstairs. They knew that if I didn't answer the phone, something must have been wrong. Luckily, that was exactly what they thought. Both my dad and my older brother came down the stairs. My brother, who played baseball in a college, brought his aluminum baseball bat down there with him. When the man's attention left me and then switched over to my family, my dad told me to get into the kitchen, which I immediately got up and did. I was able to watch through the small window in the door to the kitchen to see what happened next. My brother nearly took the guy's head off with a swing of the bat. The man was so surprised at the ferocity of the swing that he almost fell back onto his butt. He was able to prevent himself from doing so, however. Before my brother had a chance to swing at him again, though, the man quickly ran to the door and then out into the snowy night. My brother was following him, clearly intending to take the man down, but my dad called him back. He didn't feel it was worth risking any sort of injury to my brother to chase the man down. After that, no one would ever stay down in the restaurant by themselves. There had never been any sort of attack like that on our restaurant before, so it hadn't seemed like it was a dangerous thing to do. But after this, 2 family members and eventually a weapon were kept in the dining room at all times. I am happy to tell you that we never had to use the weapon. I was an only child who had 2 working parents. I very often, throughout my life, would come home from school to an empty house. This was during the 80s, and I often had to fend for myself for a while after getting home. I was used to making my own dinner, my favorite being a can of Pac-Man pasta, and do my homework while I waited for my parents to come home. When I was home by myself, I wasn't supposed to answer the door, and my parents had a code that they used if it was them calling on the phone. They would let the phone ring twice, they would hang up, and then call again. I also would enter the house from the back door, which led into the kitchen. This was to keep anyone from watching me and possibly knowing that I was there by myself. I remember this day pretty clearly. First, it was very dark out through the day. Storm clouds had overcast the entire sky, and it was like this throughout the day. It was also very windy outside. But despite the fact that it seemed like it was about to storm at any moment, it never started raining during the day. I had an umbrella to use on the way home in case it did, but it didn't seem like I would be needing it. I was nervous walking home, thinking that it would start pouring on me at any moment, and I really hated being wet. I was 11 years old at the time, and not a very big kid either. The wind was so strong that it was pretty hard to walk against on my way home, but I managed. I am lucky that it didn't start raining because the wind was so bad. I felt that if I had to open my umbrella, I would end up flying away like Mary Poppins, but much more violently. I was happy when I saw my house and knew in a few moments that I would be inside of it. I slipped into the backyard through the side yard. I was about to walk up the steps to the kitchen door when I suddenly stopped. The kitchen door had 6 windows on it. There were 3 beside 3 more. The one on the bottom left side, which was close to the doorknob, had been broken. I wondered if it had been broken because something propelled by the strong wind had broken it, or if someone had broken into the house. I wasn't sure, and I didn't know if I should go into the house and try to check it out or not. Cautiously, I walked up the 3 steps to the door. I reached out to try the doorknob, and to my surprise, it wasn't locked. There was no way that my parents would not have locked the door before they left for work. They were way too meticulous about that sort of thing. The only explanation in my mind was that someone had broken into the house and left the door unlocked. Terrified, I turned and ran back into the front yard. I went to our neighbor's house and pounded on the door. A senior couple lived there and they were retired, so they were generally always home. I told them what I had seen, and they let me into the house while they first called the police, and then I called my parents to let them know what happened. The police arrived and entered the house. They found a man hiding in our basement in our crawl space. I am not sure why he chose to hide there because I assumed he had broke into our house to rob it. I couldn't be more wrong. The man had escaped from the local jail. He was on trial for kidnapping and abusing the kids that he had kidnapped. When I had first walked up to the back door, I had considered that the window was just broken because the wind had blown something through it. I almost considered going into the house and looking around, but I am glad that I knew my parents would never have left the door unlocked like that. Otherwise, who knows what might have happened to me that day. I moved around a lot when I was a kid. I grew up in a military family, so my dad changing stations was pretty common. He had a high rank and a high salary, though, so we never had to live in military housing, which was a bit of a good thing. The few times I'd been on military housing, I didn't care for it much at all. The biggest thing was trying to make new friends whenever I came to a new place to live. But I never really had a problem than that. I wasn't too shy, and since I did go to schools that were mainly populated by military children, there were many who were looking to make new friends. So I had a lot of different best friends in many different places throughout my childhood. One of the most unique experiences I have ever had, though, was a friend that I made when I was 13 years old. First off, even though the school had mostly military children in it too, I made friends with a guy whose family was not in the military. Not only did the guy, Kyle, go to the same school as I did, but he only lived down the street from me as well. So, the two of us spent a lot of time hanging out at school and at each other's houses. Looking back at my life before high school, he probably was the best friend that I had ever had growing up. Kyle and I used to have sleepovers at each other's houses all of the time. We spent so much time at each other's houses that we didn't even have to ask our parents' permission in order to spend the night. We just would be hanging out at one place or the other, and we just eventually end up going to bed. If one of us didn't come home, our parents just assumed that we were at the other's house. Maybe, on occasion, one of our parents would call the other's parents, but that didn't happen very often. More often than not, we spent the night at my home. But that was mostly because I had several video game systems. He actually had the nicer house. It was a very old house that his family had lived in for a very long time. It always gave me a bit of a weird feeling when I was there late at night, especially when I had to get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. The floors were very creaky, and I was always upset that I was going to wake someone up. Fortunately for me, the family was used to it, and I never woke any of them up. Kyle had a really large bed too, and whenever I slept over, the two of us slept in the bed. Before anyone gets the wrong idea, though, we didn't sleep together or anything. We didn't have a friendship quite like that, even though we were very close. I tell you this because it makes what happened on this one night all the more unexplainable. We had both been up pretty late, and by the time we got to bed, we both completely crashed. I barely even remember climbing into bed. I didn't notice what woke me up either. Normally, I only woke up on the rare occasion that I had to get up and go to the bathroom. However, I didn't feel like I had to do that. So, it wasn't until I heard and felt it that I realized what must have woken me up. There was a knocking sound coming from below the bed, and it felt like the bed was being knocked on as well. It was startling and unpleasant. The first thing I did was look across the bed to Kyle. I thought that maybe he might have done something to have made the noise or shake the bed. However, like normal, he was fast and very deeply asleep. Plus, he was not the sort of guy to play pranks like that, so I never really thought it would be him. There was another knocking sound, and I could once again feel the vibration from the bed. It felt like someone was hiding under the bed and knocking on the bed frame. I was immediately frightened, thinking that some intruder or someone had broken into the house and was hiding under the bed. I was too old to really believe that there was a monster or a ghost under the bed. Part of me tried to convince myself that it was still just my imagination. I continued to lay in bed, hugging my pillow. I thought if I just laid there for a while, I would just drift off to sleep and chalk the whole thing up to my imagination in the morning. Then I heard someone from under the bed whisper, "You won't wake up." I heard it clearly, so there was no doubt in my mind. Terrified, I cried out and jumped out of the bed. Finally, Kyle woke up, and he seemed a bit worried by me crying out. I explained that there was someone under the bed, and I ran and turned on the light. Kyle didn't seem so concerned, and I checked and didn't see anyone under the bed at all. There was no one in the room except for him and me. He told me not to worry about it and to shut the light off so we could go back to sleep. I did so, even though I was sure that getting to sleep for me would be a very difficult thing. In the morning, Kyle explained to me that weird things like that happen occasionally in the house. It was nothing that anyone in the family really ever got worked up about anymore. Still, I can't imagine anyone not being even more frightened without an explanation. Kyle and I still hung out at his house a lot, but I never experienced anything like that again. But we stayed friends for a very long time. Before my dad died, he once told me a story from when he was in Vietnam in the 2020s. He told me about a mission where he and one other American with 5 CIDG strikers were tasked to emplace seismic ground sensors along a trail network deep in the jungle. He said they were about 2 days into the mission when he and 2 of the strikers split off from the main group to go watch a nearby trail intersection. He said the jungle was pretty quiet that day, just the sounds of birds and bugs, and an occasional monkey. He said they had been watching the trail intersection for about 3 or 4 hours, and were deciding on whether to move further down the trail or to turn back and link up with the rest of the patrol. Before leaving the cover of the brush, my dad said he checked the trail ahead of them one last time and prepared his men to move. Now, here's where the story gets interesting, and he told this part with absolute dead seriousness. He said, just as he started to step out onto the trail, he sees a light-skinned Black Union cavalry soldier in full battle gear laying alongside the trail just shy of the intersection. My dad said the Union soldier had 2 pistols, a Spencer rifle and a short curved club at his hip. As my dad was trying to process what he was seeing, the soldier looked directly at him and smiled. Then the soldier slowly placed a finger up to his lips, as if to tell him to be silent, and then motioned my dad back off the trail. My dad said he signaled for his men to remain hidden, and he recalled that as he slipped back into the jungle on one side of the trail, the Union soldier did the same on his side of the trail. Less than 10 seconds later, he said the lead element of a group of NVA, North Vietnamese Army soldiers, walked right through the trail intersection some 30 feet away. My dad estimated that the group was comprised of some 70 to 80 soldiers equipped with automatic rifles, light machine guns, and rocket-propelled grenade launchers. He has no doubt that his entire team would have been wiped out on the spot. He said, as soon as the enemy soldiers had passed, he and his team beat feet out of there as fast and as quietly as they could and rejoined with the rest of the patrol. He reported the enemy soldiers his team had encountered, but decided not to say anything about the soldier he had seen. My dad kept this secret for many, many years, only telling me just before he passed and earlier, only telling his grandmother on her deathbed in the 1970s. He said when he told his grandmother, she smiled and without opening her eyes told him, "You saw old Red Tom." Red Tom was my great-great-grandfather. He was a half-black, half-Creek freeman who was a scout for the Union Army during the Civil War and later served with the U.S. Cavalry in the American West. He was known for carrying 2 pistols, a Spencer rifle, and a Creek war club into battle.